What's going on, everybody? My name is Alex Wilson. I'm my co-host beside me, Anthony Rivardo from Fireside Giants. It's an Empire Sports Media production. You're listening to the Fireside Giants podcast. If you are a diehard Giants fan, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and like below. We love to engage with everybody, so leave a comment as well in the YouTube section. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at a couple tight ends because the Giants, Evan Engram, obviously Kyle Rudolph has been cut already. We believe Evan Engram is going to be allowed to walk in free agency, and a lot of tight ends are being franchise tagged really strangely. Dalton Schultz, David Njoku, that was a strange one. So now the Giants are kind of looking at the free agent market and saying, how can we supplement this position? We're losing two starting level tight ends. And what's the process going to look like from here on out? What kind of free agents are available? And the draft obviously presents some interesting options. We've talked about Jeremy Rucker out of Ohio State. There's Weidermeyer. There is a couple other great players who the Giants could be looking at, Trey McBride, some really great pass catching options. But we want to take a look at free agency specifically and what options the Giants could look at and say, hey, maybe this fits in our budget. If we, sign into a 2 or 3 year deal, maybe an out after the second season, Anthony, something interesting to consider. But before we dive into the three guys we have in mind, how do you do today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Free agency is just about a week away. Next Wednesday, free agency will begin. We're seeing a bunch of new contracts being handed out. Aaron Rodgers, we're seeing the franchise tag go out, and a few of those franchise tags were placed on tight ends. The tight end market is really heating up. It looks like some players are going to get some big bags in free agency this year at the tight end position. We saw David Njoku got franchise tag. We saw Dalton Schultz and Mike Gesicki. All these guys were projected to be some of the top free agents to hit the market at any position, but absolutely the top three to hit the market at the tight end position. And now they've been franchise tagged, so it's kind of the second wave. Who are these next guys that are going to hit the market that the Giants could potentially consider? There's, of course, going to be some higher end options that might not be too realistic for the Giants. They'd have to work out the cap space a whole lot more than anticipated in order to get a guy like a Zach Ertz that we're going to discuss, or maybe somebody else. But there's also some lower end options, some of those boom or bust guys, a low risk, high reward type of signings. I know everybody loved the signing of a John Ross, right? Because it was so low risk and so high reward, and he played pretty good when he was healthy. So the Giants can maybe find a tight end with similar ability, similar low risk, high reward ability. And I think that they will probably go ahead and sign a tight end on the free agency market this offseason. It's very important. Evan Engram, they reportedly have not closed the door on Evan Engram just yet. It's possible they can bring him back, but he's fielding a lot of interest from different teams on the market. I don't think it's likely for Evan Engram to return to the Giants in 2022. So I'm excited to see if they decide to patch this hole up in free agency or if they wait until April and they address it in the draft.
Yeah, and I think they will do maybe both. I think they might take a guy in the third round. Obviously, we've talked about a couple options, and Andy Bischoff, the new tight ends coach for the Giants, did help develop Mark Andrews. So that's a significant name, and obviously has a track record to go with it. So I think that he would be a good coach to develop a young player like a Jeremy Ruckert, and he's a player I think would be a perfect fit for the Giants specifically. But let's dive into the first option here for the Giants. We want to talk about O.J. Howard. That's the guy I want to jump into first. So O.J. Howard has played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the last 5 years. He made 17 appearances last year, started in 9 games, tallied 135 yards and a touchdown. Obviously was behind Rob Gronkowski and Cameron Brate. Kind of got left in the dust. 6'6", 251 pounds, 27 years old, former first-round pick, I believe. The guy, he just never really was given the opportunity to be that primary starter after the first 3 years, and they kind of just went away from him. Once Tom Brady got there, it was all about the Gronkowski show, and O.J. Howard kind of got left in the dust. I think his best days could still be ahead of him, and he's going to be cheap, right? You might even be able to snag him up on a 1-year deal, a 1-year prove-it deal, because 2 years of inconsistency, 2 years kind of being behind Cameron Brate and Gronk. This is the perfect opportunity for the Giants to say, hey, man, we'll give you an opportunity to start on a cheap contract. Maybe you can roll that over into a bigger deal with us or another team. Anthony, what do you think about O.J. Howard? I think that kind of strategy would make sense for a player like him.
Yeah, again, I think that O.J. Howard is that guy that I was referring to, that low risk, high reward. I'm taking a look at Pro Football Focus. They have him as one of the lowest ranked tight ends available in free agency this year. And honestly, that's surprising because, 5 years ago, 2017, we all remember that first round draft class of tight ends, right? We were all super excited because we thought maybe the Giants would go ahead and get O.J. Howard because he was falling in the draft, almost made it to the Giants, but just not quite. Then we're like, okay, maybe David Njoku out of Miami. He might be a perfect selection for the Giants. Not quite. Went to the Cleveland Browns. Evan Engram is the guy that they settled on. But out of those three, OJ Howard was looked at as the best prospect coming out of college at the time. He just hasn't panned out. And unfortunately for OJ Howard, his career hasn't even panned out to the extent that Evan Engram's panned out. Evan Engram was the last tight end taken in the first round of that draft, and he's had arguably the best career so far other than David Njoku. He's definitely had a better career than OJ Howard, and that's very unfortunate to say, but that also is to be said that there is talent stored within OJ Howard. At one point, he was looked at as a very hot commodity. He was looked at as a real talent with great potential. He has not reached that potential, unfortunately, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Will he reach that potential? I'm not sure, but he could potentially sign somewhere on a one-year deal, prove it, and make sure that the team knows he has potential and is a long-term building block. He's still young. He's not an old player by any means. He hasn't been in the league that long. He's only 27 years old. He's had a couple good years. He's had a couple pretty bad years as well. This past season, 2021, Pro Football Focus, he was ranked 69th out of 70 potential tight ends on the grading scale. Very bad. Obviously, not good performance there. But in 2020, he had an 80 overall grade, and he was a pretty solid player there. He only played 132 snaps, but he looked good in those 132 snaps. And in his rookie season, he did flash some potential. There was potential there at one point with OJ Howard. He just has not reached it. But you can't deny the fact that this is a player that was a first-round talent, that did have a good amount of potential entering the league, and it's a projected one-year, $4 million deal. That might be exactly what the Giants are looking for.
Right. And the biggest negative when it comes to OJ Howard, because I do want to give the objective side of this, biggest negative, he's a terrible run blocker. The Giants may want to find a guy who offers them a little bit more in a run blocking stance. And I think that OJ Howard is not going to be that kind of tight end for them. Maybe Andy Bischoff is able to extract the best of what's left of his potential. But he's never been a good run blocker. He's really a receiving tight end. So you kind of have to look at him and say he's kind of a one-trick pony at this point in time. He's a bigger guy. You know, he can attack the seams, but he's a good underneath security blanket, which I think Daniel Jones would be really happy to have, because Evan Engram just couldn't handle the fastballs that DJ was throwing him in those short, 0 to 5, 0 to 10 yard area. I think that Evan Ingram's fundamentals, the way he caught the football just was not really great. He always did a little jump thing. His fingers, he always looked away from the football, just did not have strong hands. OJ Howard might be a little bit better in that realm, but the run blocking stance from him, that category, he's not going to be proficient there. And I think that might be a big deterrent for the Giants looking for a more well-rounded player. Because realistically, you may want to find a tight end that's not like the best pass catcher, but he's a good run blocker. A good run blocker that's an average pass catcher is a good enough free agent signing for me. I'm okay with that. I'm not looking for an elite receiving tight end in free agency. If I'm going to look for that, I'm going to go to the draft. Like a Jeremy Ruckert who has phenomenal hands, like a Trey McBride. There's a couple of guys who could be phenomenal pass catching guys in that respect. So when it comes to OJ Howard, that's his biggest con. And similar to the second guy we have in mind, Zach Ertz, right? Zach Ertz got traded to the Arizona Cardinals, 31 years old, spent the first 6 games with Philadelphia, the last 11 with Arizona, looked a lot better, had 574 yards and 3 touchdowns. Another inconsistent player, had some injury issues in the past, but altogether, he's been decent, right? He's a good receiving tight end. Problem is, Philadelphia just did not utilize him properly. He looked like his morale was low. He didn't really care. He didn't care much. They also had other guys they were trying to get the football to, and Dallas Goedert, who ended up getting a big contract this season as well. The guy has 3 Pro Bowls to his name. Best season came back in 2018, 1,163 yards and 8 touchdowns. Also put up 74.4% catch rate, pretty solid. If the Giants could revive that version of Zach Ertz, would be a hell of a pickup. But who knows how much he's going to get paid? He'll probably be a middling free agent. But another guy who's not the best run blocker, you're really going after him to be a receiving tight end, Anthony. But looking at it, he'll probably be more expensive than OJ Howard simply because he's more established. But, who would you rather have in that respect?
Yeah, he absolutely will be more expensive, and I do think Zach Ertz is going to be out of the price range for the Giants, but if they end up clearing enough cap space and saying, hey, we want to take a swing at the tight end position, Zach Ertz probably makes perfect sense because he is a great receiver, and in the system that Brian Daboll is planning on implementing, they're going to be throwing the ball more than they're going to be running the ball, and they're going to need a tight end with capable receiving abilities, right? And Zach Ertz, while his projected contract is far more than the one-year, $4 million deal that OJ Howard is projected, for Zach Ertz, it's a projection of 2 years, $10 million on average. So I don't know if that's a realistic number for the Giants to meet, but maybe he sits on the free agency market. His price gets chipped down a little bit. I haven't heard of much of a market for Zach Ertz just yet anyway. I've heard about Evan Engram. I've heard about Njoku, Gesicki, these guys, but I haven't heard much about Zach Ertz. So maybe that projection could get brought down a little bit, but a projected 2-year, $10 million contract is or $10 million per year contract is probably going to be too much for the Giants. However, you kind of mentioned it. This is a really solid tight end throughout his entire career. I mean, he spent 8 years with Philadelphia. Giants fans are all too familiar with Zach Ertz because he scored many touchdowns against the Giants in those big division rivalry games. He was a great player for them. Unfortunately for Zach Ertz, Philadelphia also found another great tight end in Dallas Goedert. And basically, they didn't need Zach Ertz anymore. So what did they do? They traded him. They were smart. That is what the front office should have done. And now he went to Arizona, and he had a very good year with Arizona. I mean, if you take a look at these stats, considering he got traded mid-season, he still put up 763 yards and 5 touchdowns on the season with 74 receptions. That is a really solid stat line for a guy who's 31 years old and got traded to a new team after spending 8 prior seasons on one team. So he is still a very good, capable player. He's at the back end of his career. He's probably only got a couple years left on his career, but for the Giants, maybe looking into getting some veterans in the locker room, some guys who have been around the league for a while, can be a safe, reliable security blanket for Daniel Jones as a receiver. Zach Ertz might fit the bill, and it's just whether or not they consider him valuable enough to meet his contractual demands. But Zach Ertz is one of the better tight ends available in free agency. He's definitely the high-end option. He's definitely a more established and a better player than O.J. Howard. But of course, he's going to be a far more expensive player than O.J. Howard. So if I had to pick between those two, I'd probably go with O.J. Howard because I like the low risk, high reward. But if I'm, the Giants and I really want to get this offense set right for Daniel Jones, I might consider making the investment into this tight end position, getting that shored up, and not having to worry about it as much in the NFL draft.
Yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. I think I'm with you. I think I would go OJ Howard simply because he's cheaper. He has something to prove. I don't think Zach Ertz really has anything to prove at this point. He is what he is. OJ Howard, this is his opportunity, his 1-year deal to kind of prove that he can be a better tight end than he's shown the last couple of years. And with that being said, both of them are absolute terrible run blockers. So you're not getting a better run blocker out of either of them. They're both going to offer below average play in that regard. So why not go with the guy with a little bit more potential at this point in his career and can actually, maybe fight his way into another contract with the team. Who knows? If he had a good 2022 season with the Giants, maybe they give him a 2-year extension. It probably wouldn't be very expensive after all. And the Giants maybe have another developmental guy behind him that they're developing and growing. And that way they don't have to throw a rookie into the mix at tight end from the 3rd round and hope that he is able to block NFL players and protect Daniel Jones and help offer good hands as well. And, it's a lot more difficult for a rookie than it would be in a guy that's been in the league for 5 years at this point. But the last player that we have on the docket is AlieCox from the Indianapolis Colts, 6'5", 267 pounds, 28 years old. Interesting player nonetheless. 17 games he played last year, started in 7, 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. So some pretty decent numbers last season. Only caught 53.3% of his passes, but the last 2 years he's been a lot better in terms of completion rate. 79.5% catch rate in 2020, which is phenomenal on 39 targets. So he had some good action. Had the most targets of his career last year with Carson Wentz under center. So when you're looking at the Colts, they definitely used him, but he's a far better run blocker, right? So, Anthony, when you're looking at a guy like AlieCox and in terms of what he offers, decent pass catcher, but a much better blocker for the Giants. So that could be the selling point.
Yeah, absolutely. That should be the selling point. If the Giants really do want to solve this position, the tight end position in free agency, AlieCox might be the perfect solution to their problem because not only is he a good receiver, he's very capable as a receiver. He's got really good run after the catch ability. He's good against the zone coverage, knows how to kind of sneak in between those holes, make a catch and go. But he's also a great run blocker, as you just mentioned. You do a little bit of research. I found a tweet that's really great and gives some perspective on it. The Colts like to use a sniffer tight end, which is basically you take the tight end, you line them up behind the guard, and he works as a fullback. And that's what the Giants are going to want to do. I read an article today where the Giants are planning on not re-signing either Elijah Penny or Cullen Gillespie. They are not going to have a true fullback, in the sense of a word, a fullback on their roster this upcoming season, according to this report. What they want is a tight end with the ability to line up in the backfield as an H-back and block. And that's exactly what Mo AlieCox can do, because he can play as that tight end. He can go downfield. He can be a vertical threat, be a receiver, but he can also move into the backfield and be a lead blocker for Saquon Barkley or whatever running back gets to start for the Giants this season. So I really like Mo AlieCox. In terms of a contractual projection, PFF is saying somewhere around a 3-year deal with about 6.67 million on average per year. That's a lot more affordable for the Giants, especially if it is a 3-year deal. They can push some of that money down the road. Mo AlieCox has established himself as a very solid player in this league. I think that he is worth that contract. He's an all-around tight end, which is super important. He's not only going to contribute as a receiver, but he's also going to contribute in the running game as a blocker. And I think that's exactly what the Giants need, especially when you take into consideration the report that they don't want a fullback. They want a tight end that can do it all. Be a receiver, but also line up in the backfield and be a lead blocker, play that fullback position on the snaps where they require one. The Giants aren't going to have a fullback out there very frequently. I mean, if you take a look at what the Bills did last year, I don't think they had a fullback on their roster. They rarely used a fullback. They love to line up in 11 personnel, 10 personnel. It was very rare that you saw two backs in the backfield with the Buffalo Bills last season. So I think that it's very likely the Giants have no fullback on their roster. They get a good tight end who can go out there, be a receiver, but also line up in the backfield, be a good blocker. And I think Mo AlieCox is the perfect man to fit that role for the Giants if they decide that they want to spend some money in free agency on the tight end position.
I mean, the Giants had 2 fullbacks on the roster last year, which is like stupid as hell. So, we had Cullen Gillespie, who didn't even play fullback really. He was really just a special teams player. And our special team was not very good. And then, of course, you had Elijah Penny, who I liked, actually. I like Elijah Penny. He's a good dude. He fights hard, man. He played running back for a couple games there when guys were injured. So I respect him a lot. Although now you move on. The reason that fullback was such a prominent position on the Giants to begin with is because we could not throw the football and the protection scheme was terrible. So we were running the football a lot and our offensive line couldn't block. So we were playing this power gap scheme that required the fullbacks to be the lead blockers and really relying on them to open up gaps. And it just did not work to begin with because the offensive line was being tantalized the entire time. But now moving forward, we can hope that they kind of do a little bit better job putting together the offensive line. So fullbacks aren't necessarily the offense isn't predicated on having a good fullback. Now you have a tight end who can feature in that role. It's always good to have players who can feature in different roles. Mo AlieCox seems to be a good guy for this specific fit because he can catch passes adequately. He's 27 years old, same age as OJ Howard. He's a much better run blocker and he can receive the football. He's had more receiving yards last year than OJ Howard has in the last 2 years combined. And that's including touchdowns too. So with that in mind, Mo AlieCox makes a lot of sense. Now, the question is, how much is he going to cost? Because he's coming off arguably one of his best seasons. So if you're looking at him in terms of potential contract, maybe a 2-year, $12 million deal makes sense, Anthony. What do you think about that?
Well, like I said, PFF is projecting 3 years, 6.67 million on average per year.
Cheap
So
okay,
probably
that makes sense.
Somewhere around $18 million over 3 years, maybe $19 million. And I think that's fair because what you get out of Mo AlieCox is an all-around tight end, a good receiver, and arguably an even better run blocker. You go on Twitter, you watch some of these all-22 clips. He can block. He is a very capable run blocker, and he would be a perfect fit for the Giants because of that reason, because he's not only a good receiver. Evan Engram, if they sign Evan Engram back, right? I know that they didn't close the door. It seems like he's gone. But if they sign Evan Engram back, he is strictly a receiver. Like, he's not one of those players that you can rely on to line up in the backfield as a fullback. Mo AlieCox, you can ask him to do that, and he can do it successfully. You can put him in the backfield and be a lead blocker. So I think, honestly, if we're talking about a scheme fit, we're talking about a personnel fit, Mo AlieCox is perfect for the Giants if they are willing to spend the nearly $6 to $7 million per year to acquire his talents. But if they are willing to do that, if they clear enough cap space, I do think that Mo AlieCox is a perfect signing for the Giants this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to consider. On a 2-year, 3-year deal with $6 million AAV, definitely a little bit pricey for the position we're in right now. But if you consider him a long-term solution, maybe it's worth it. So I'm curious to see what Joe Shane and Brian Dable, do moving forward and how they view the tight end position. Maybe they just try to plug it in the draft and say, let's save our money. Because ultimately, with the minimal money we have right now, you're going to have to push some money to 2023. It's just how it's going to go. So it's got to be for the right players if you're going to do that. But guys, hope you enjoyed this episode of Fireside Giants, checking out 3 different tight ends who could fit the bill for this team. We'll do some more draft reviews in the coming days here. I kind of want to take a look at Breece Hall, some running backs or some corners that I really like. I've been taking a look at Roger McCreary out of Auburn and Martin Emerson. as well from Mississippi State. So two guys kind of different in a lot of ways. One lankier and one smaller and faster with shorter arms, but both can be very talented players at the next level. So I do want to take a look at those guys. Some under the radar day 2 options at cornerback if the Giants decide we don't want to go with Sauce Gardner, like we talked about a couple days ago. But hope you enjoyed the episode, my friends. Make sure to like and subscribe below, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.